I now give the floor to His Excellency José Condungua Antonio Pacheco, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Mozambique.
Mr. President of the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Your Excellency, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellency, Honorable Heads of State and Government, ladies and gentlemen. It is my distinct honor and privilege to address this general debate of the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly on behalf of His Excellency Felipe Jacinto Nyusi, President of the Republic of Mozambique, who has been prevented from being present at this august gathering due to national needs and a complex agenda. I would like to take this opportunity to warmly congratulate His Excellency Professor Tijani Muhammad Bande on his election as President of this session of the General Assembly. We offer you, Mr. President, Mozambique's unequivocal support during your term. We hail the work of Her Excellency Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garcés, President of the 73rd session, for the progress achieved during her term, particularly in mobilizing the international community to implement the international commitments undertaken and actions that enhance the United Nations as a more relevant space for multilateral coordination on multiple challenges and global commitments. I convey our warm gratitude to His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, for his selfless efforts to strengthen the United Nations system by reforming the international peace and security architecture and repositioning the development system to better respond to the aspirations of member states, with a particular emphasis on implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, the 74th session of the General Assembly takes place at a time when the world faces the outbreak of political, geostrategic, and trade tensions, the devastating effects of climate change, the rise in inequalities among states, and in the access to quality basic social services which are essential to sustain a dignified quality of life. Sub-Saharan Africa, where Mozambique is located, is an example of this reality. As we continue to be a region with the largest number of disadvantaged people afflicted by multidimensional deprivations, such as low income, reduced levels of access to education, health, food, water, and sanitation, as well as inadequate development of socio-economic infrastructures that drive sustainable development. In this context, the focus of this session's theme on eradicating poverty is timely, as the issue of poverty challenges all of us and galvanizes all global agendas, particularly the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. To this end, Mozambique reiterates the relevance of and adherence to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, and the importance of partners respecting the commitments undertaken under the framework of the internationally agreed development goals, including predictability of aid flows from our partners under the terms of the Paris Declaration on Aid Effectiveness. Mr. President, the world continues to be plagued by inequalities, tensions, and debilitating divisions that challenge the role of multilateralism as the preferred mechanism to debate ideas as well as coordinate and reach consensus in an environment characterized by growing mistrust among nations. The spirit of the United Nations Charter states that the organization's central mission is to forge lasting solutions to put an end to prolonged insecurity caused by political instability and internal and external conflicts involving states and other actors, particularly in the African continent and the Middle East. The prevalence of actions linked to fundamentalism and violent extremism, as well as arms proliferation and trading, particularly of weapons of mass destruction and small arms and light weapons that threaten national, regional, and global peace and security, are causes of added concern for our country. In this regard, and under the framework of our peace policy, we support all global initiatives and partnerships, including actions focusing on dialogue through international disarmament mechanisms and combating fundamentalism and related activities, violent extremism, and all forms of terrorist acts. In this context, Mozambique reiterates our full support for the Secretary-General of the United Nations in his efforts to reform the United Nations development system, as well as his peace and security initiatives to promote dialogue as the fundamental tool of an agenda based on conflict prevention. Mozambique considers that the reform of the Security Council is a fundamental goal in the conflict prevention and management architecture. We reaffirm our desire for greater speed in the negotiations among governments to reform the Security Council so that it may gain greater credibility and legitimacy and better reflect 21st century reality in its composition and actions, which we hope to be broader. Mr. President, it is in the light of international law and the United Nations Charter that Mozambique once more joins the other states in calling for adherence to the roadmap adopted by the UN for the peaceful resolution of the dispute in Western Sahara through a referendum on the self-determination of the Sahrawi people. We continue to be concerned with the situation that prevails in the occupied Palestinian territories. In this regard, we reiterate our appeal for a negotiated and lasting resolution of the Palestinian issue based on dialogue, by which the two states accept to peacefully coexist as neighbors according to the principles of good coexistence and under international law. Mozambique reiterates our appeal for normalization of political, diplomatic, economic, and financial relations between Cuba and the United States of America. The economic blockade against Cuba has no justification in a world that we wish to be more harmonious and committed to a global development agenda devoid of exclusion. We also appeal that the spirit of the Charter and dialogue find fertile ground in the leaders of both states, and that the legacy of peace, harmony, and coexistence be cultivated and transmitted to future generations. In the same vein, we join Tanzania in their statement on the need to lift sanctions against Zimbabwe. So that the Zimbabwe people may coexist effectively and harmoniously with the global village. Mr. President, Mozambique incorporated the 2030 Agenda Sustainable Development Goals into our national governance program, which gives priority to agribusiness, economic and social infrastructure networks, the expansion of the electric grid coverage, and ecotourism, which, combined with other cross-cutting economic and social areas, will drive our eagerly desired sustainable development. Galvanizing multilateral efforts for poverty eradication, quality education, climate action, and inclusion is an appeal to our collective responsibility for promoting inclusion in order to leave no one behind. In this regard, the government of Mozambique adopted an approach focused on protecting and respecting human rights, promoting gender equality and equity, as well as capacity development for women, youth, and other vulnerable social groups. Considering as well the demographic dividend of Mozambican society. Mr. President, due to our geographic location, Mozambique is considered by some scientists as the second most vulnerable country in the world to the effects of climate change. The two extremely severe tropical cyclones, Idai and Kenneth, which devastated vast regions of our country in March and April of this year, are evidence of this. The balance points to 689 deaths and the destruction of the economic and social fabric in the central and northern regions of our country, while the south continues to suffer from the effects of drought and Cyclone Dineo, which occurred in 2018. We wish to take this opportunity to reiterate our gratitude to all bilateral and multilateral cooperation partners, to the Secretary General of the United Nations and the United Nations system of agencies and funds for their multifaceted support during our emergencies and in the process of rebuilding infrastructures and socio-economic fabric affected by these cyclones. We were aware that responding to the effects of two cyclones was beyond our country's capacity. Therefore, in May of this year, we convened an international donor conference in the city of Beira, in coordination with cooperation partners, which resulted in commitments in the amount of $1.2 billion US dollars of the $3.2 billion US dollars required according to the post-disaster needs assessment estimates. The new government continues to make efforts toward mobilizing resources to fill the reconstruction financing gap. And again, I would like to express our profound gratitude for the promised support and the solidarity, and to reiterate our readiness to continue to work with our partners in order to accelerate the disbursement process for the promised aid. We are also committed to strengthening adaptation and resilience measures under the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, of which we were signatories since June of 2018, as we are aware that natural disasters driven by climate have become recurrent phenomena. On behalf of our country, we would like to take this opportunity to express our solidarity and condolences to the families of victims of Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas. Actions to manage climate change effects on our country also include strengthening the early warning system for natural phenomena and mapping vulnerable areas in order to prevent natural disasters and mitigate their effects. Our actions also contemplate the creation of risk response and management structures, the National Emergency Fund, and join the African Risk Capacity, which is a specialized agency of the African Union for natural disaster insurance. In this regard, we thank the Secretary General of the United Nations for his wise and timely decision to convene the Climate Summit this week in order to mobilize the international community to increase the level of ambition toward achieving the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In order to reverse the nefarious consequences of global warming, which is a powerful threat to our planet and to humanity. With respect to integrated rural development, sustainable management of biodiversity, ecosystems, and natural resources, Mozambique has made efforts to preserve biodiversity by creating conservation areas covering approximately 25% of the 800,000 square kilometers of our national territory. These actions are reinforced by the continued increase of the use of cleaner and renewable energy based on natural gas, wind, solar, hydro, in order to provide energy for all to all our citizens by 2030. Mr. President, on August 6th of this year, we signed the Maputo Peace and National Reconciliation Agreement, which reflects the success of our internal dialogue and creates the proper conditions to galvanize the Mozambican development agenda. With this positive step behind us, we express our utmost recognition to the international community, particularly the dialogue facilitators, the contact group, coordinated by the Swiss ambassador, with the support of the United States ambassador in Maputo, for this historical accomplishment that cements the consensus reached around the administrative decentralization and military affairs agenda. The disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration process is currently underway, covering aspects related to the command structure and direction of our national defense and security forces in order to achieve this goal. We recognize that the accomplishment of this important process requires robust technical and financial capacity. For this reason, we take this opportunity to reiterate our appeal to the international community for continued support and assistance in implementing the agreement, particularly in maintaining dialogue as the inevitable platform to resolve disagreements. We wish to share our greatest happiness in receiving on September 4th through the 6th, 2019, His Holiness Pope Francis, the head of the Catholic Church, whose visit under the theme of hope, peace, and reconciliation strengthened our conviction and hope in the consolidation of national unity, peace, harmony, and common well-being through continued dialogue among Mozambicans. The full implementation of the agreement will allow our country to further strengthen democracy and hold presidential, legislative, and provincial elections on October 15th of this year, driven by the spirit of peaceful, democratic coexistence. Our successes in our internal dialogues are a positive development in our agenda to achieve permanent peace. However, this positive development is shaded by bad actors in the province of Cabo Delgado, in the north of Mozambique, who continue to raise concerns as they spread death and destruction of the socio-economic fabric, creating instability in areas of that region of our country. The government has vigorously carried out our constitutional duties to protect our citizens and their property, as well as economic and social infrastructures. The restoration of peace in our country expands and consolidates our efforts toward creating an increasingly attractive and favorable environment for public and private investments, both domestic and international. The fiscal and monetary reforms that are underway in Mozambique have led to an effective recovery of our macroeconomic stability. It was in this context that the city of Maputo, the capital of Mozambique, became the African capital of business when it welcomed the 12th United States of America Africa Business Summit, with the participation of African heads of state and government, senior representatives of the United States government, and business leaders from the African continent and the United States of America. We further highlight the convening of the International Growing Blue Conference in Maputo, which focused on the sustainable use of the oceans and seas under the 2030 Agenda. These and other events that we have hosted are part of the economic diplomacy that we are pursuing, which we wish to make more active and intense in order to bring tangible benefits for our country and the entire nation of Mozambique. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I conclude my remarks by reaffirming Mozambique's trust in the United Nations as a privileged platform for multilateral coordination in the search for solutions to the common challenges facing humanity. Let us demonstrate today, tomorrow, and always our cohesion in the noble mission of globally promoting the trinomial of peace and security, development and human rights for the advancement and well-being of the peoples of our wonderful planet. Thank you very much for your attention.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Mozambique,